How long am I supposed to hold this mannequin challenge thing? All right, we got a brand new issue of Boxing Monthly out. This is the December issue, and there's a very, very good write-up in it about Joseph Diaz Jr., written by yours truly. You guys should check this out. And photography by Miss Tiffany Lamb. Finally got some of her pictures published in the magazine as well. Some other great stuff in here too. As always, you guys, if you can't get the magazine, check out the app, the Boxing Monthly app. The coolest thing about the app is that you can go back to all the previous issues. So you can go back in time and see all the great stuff from over the years at Boxing Monthly. But enough with that. I'll stop selling the magazine. It sells itself. Let's get into some news and notes. So it's official. Tony Bellew and David Haye going at it March 4th in the O2 Arena. I don't know the details. I know this is going to be a heavyweight fight, but they haven't said if there's going to be any kind of like catch weight, if there's a limit on the weight or anything like that. And I don't know if there's going to be VADA drug testing with this thing. We know that Bellew, obviously, his cruiserweight title is the WBC title. So I don't know if he'll stay ranked in the WBC here and if that will make this fight have VADA testing or if it'll fall under some other jurisdiction. I don't believe David Haye is ranked with the WBC. So we don't know much about it. We just know it's March 4th, O2 Arena in London, going head to head with the American card with Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia. And it's not really head to head because obviously the time change and everything like that. But I think it's going to be very, very interesting. It should be for a fun day of boxing. I talked about that fight before. I did a video about it maybe a month or so ago, just talking about the possibility. I thought it would happen because it's a lucrative fight. Not a very meaningful fight though. I don't know what this does for Bellew other than bragging rights. Maybe he can outbox David Haye, who has boxed nothing but corpses and pizza boys for the last few years during his quote-unquote comeback. But Haye is still the bigger, stronger guy who's been in there with heavyweight punchers a few times. He's never really taken a big heavyweight punch. Look, David Haye is a fun fighter because of the entertainment value of his trash talk. And he's a well-spoken guy, does a good job when he does commentary now. But I've never been crazy about him as a heavyweight. You guys know that. I've never pulled any punches or held him back, I should say, when talking about David Haye. And I think that this comeback has been a lot of smoke and mirrors to try to wiggle himself into a high-profile fight. And that's what this is going to be over in the UK. But it should be a lot of fun. At this point, though, without any kind of weight limits or without VADA drug testing, anything. And I'm not trying to make accusations. I'm just putting it out there. Given all the factors, all the different scenarios that I'm playing in my mind, you just have to favor David Haye here. But more to come with that fight as details emerge. The Kovalev-Ward pay-per-view did 160,000 buys. I did a little rant video on my roof last night talking about this. Kind of a little bit of a I told you so to some of the haters who were giving me shit because I made videos criticizing Andre Ward going back to early August when Main Events and Sergey Kovalev and that side of the promotion was really trying to really promote this thing. And they wanted to get pre-sale tickets on the market 4 months before the fight was going to happen. Is my math right? Over 3 months before the fight was going to happen. And the Rock Nation side, Andre Ward's side, basically was sitting on their ass and stalling everything. They didn't want to commit to anything, didn't want to get ticket sales rolling. And look, man, it shows, okay? Andre Ward is one of those fighters from a promotional perspective who just does the bare minimum. He does what's asked of him and nothing more than that. So he will make the press conferences, the actual legitimate press conferences. He will make, all those sorts of TV appearances and stuff like that. Like HBO did a preview show on the Kovalev-Ward fight. And of course, he was, present for all of that. But going above and beyond, doing those extra things like that Q&A session that Main Events put on in early August, trying to get the kickoff going for the press for this fight. He's not going to do that kind of stuff. He's never done that kind of stuff. He never will. It's just like he doesn't travel for fights. You know, he doesn't endear himself to the mass audience of boxing. He's very, very happy having his little niche audience from Oakland and a few fans here and there around the world that appreciate his boxing ability. And I'm one of those guys. I appreciate his boxing ability, but from a promotional standpoint, he's never going to be mainstream. He doesn't really care to be. He's stated that in many interviews. He really doesn't care to be. And it shows in this promotion. 160,000 pay-per-view buys. I get it. November was a jam-packed month. You had the Pacquiao pay-per-view. You had a big UFC MMA pay-per-view. And, you know, the Pacquiao one was also in Vegas. It was in the same town, right? And the Pacquiao pay-per-view actually did pretty good. Top Rank did well on that pay-per-view, and they distributed it themselves, so they didn't have to give half of the money up to the cable provider. And this fight with Kovalev-Ward came later in the month. It was around the holiday, et cetera, et cetera. I get it. But given all that, guys, if I told you years ago when Andre Ward was winning the Super 6 tournament in 2011, that 5 years after that, in 2016, if I told you to look in the future 5 years, and you think that Andre Ward, the last American male boxing gold medalist, undefeated American, God-fearing Jesus lover in a Jesus-loving country, the last great hope for American boxing, right? The guy who's been fighting on cable, premium cable TV here in the United States pretty much since he went pro. If I told you that he was going to have a pay-per-view for the legitimate, unified light heavyweight championship of the world against an undefeated Russian knockout artist, and it was going to do 160,000 pay-per-view buys, you would have laughed at me. You would have slapped me in the face and laughed at me. Well, you wouldn't have slapped me in the face because I would have slapped you back, but you would have laughed at me. And here it is, 160,000 pay-per-view buys. And they reported, I think, 13,305, I think was the attendance, reported attendance that night. It wasn't. It might have been 10,000. I'm telling you because I was there. And they had entire sections up in the upper deck blocked off, draped off with black curtains. There was just mistake after mistake after mistake made. Main events tried. They really, really tried. I mean, even from the Friday before the fight, after the weigh-in, they did a media cocktail hour with some of the legends of boxing. And Rock Nation had nothing to do with that. It was all main events. They paid for it. They brought in fighters like Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., Pernell Whitaker. There were a lot of different boxing personalities there. And it was free alcohol, open bar for us. It was awesome. They really tried to do stuff like that. It wasn't enough. When the A side of the promotion just wasn't pulling their weight. And I'm not trying to be overly critical of Rock Nation Sports. I'm not trying to be a hater. But look, they're not boxing people. And nobody in that operation is an old school boxing person. They do great with music production and promoting musical acts. They know what they're doing in that world. And I think that they represent some baseball players, some basketball players, other athletes in other sports. But in those sports, you have players' unions. You have a league. The players' unions, they do the promoting for you. All you really do at that point, if you're Rock Nation, if you're representing an NBA player, is you negotiate contracts for them and get them the most money you can. Boxing's so different. And if you don't have an old school boxing guy as part of your team and you try to get into this business, you're going to suffer. There's just a different culture, the way the deals are done. A lot of deals are like handshake agreements, just like agreements written on napkins and stuff like that. It's very old school. And if you don't understand that culture, you're going to ruffle feathers. And Kathy Duva at Main Events made it very, very clear that it was not easy dealing with the folks at Rock Nation and Andre Ward. And now that this thing did 160,000 buys, you can expect Andre Ward's side to not make it easy negotiating that rematch. Not going to be easy at all. In fact, don't be surprised. I think it's actually very predictable that the Andre Ward side is going to start ramping up the Gennady Golovkin rhetoric, because this was the biggest fight they could do at light heavyweight from a promotional standpoint, and you saw that it was a dud. The only fight out there that they can think of. They're not going to get Canelo Alvarez to move up to 175 pounds. Just trust me, okay? It probably will start in the beginning of next year, but they're really going to start amping up the Triple G rhetoric. And don't be surprised if a rematch between Kovalev and Ward gets delayed somehow and that can gets kicked down the road. But enough of that. Let's talk about some of the action from last week. Starting off in Cardiff, Wales, where Terry Flanagan gets the fourth defense of his WBO lightweight title with an 8th round TKO over Orlando Cruz. He actually, I think, dropped him in the 8th round before it was stopped. So now, Terry Flanagan is 32-0 with 13 knockouts. As I said, he's got multiple defenses of his WBO lightweight title. Here's the thing. It's time for him to step up in opposition. You look at Terry Flanagan's resume. He hasn't left home at all. He's fought over there in the UK, and that's fine because there's a hot scene there. You got to step up the opposition. In 2017, I'd like to see him go after another one of these titleists. The lightweight division is wide open. There's absolutely no decisiveness at the top. We don't know who the top guy is. There needs to be some unification. Terry Flanagan needs to step it up in 2017. He's won a title, defended it, made some cash. Time to step it up in opposition. The big fight, though, last weekend, obviously, was between Vasyl Lomachenko and Nicholas Walters. And by now, you guys have probably all seen it. You know that Lomachenko completely dominated and made Nicholas Walters look amateurish and won by 7th round retirement. Nicholas Walters quit. So a lot of people are talking about this. This is a sensitive issue of boxing fans. Quitting, right? Now, I try to be sensitive to guys who retire on their stool due to injury. You know, I think back to Vitaly Klitschko against Chris Bird. I mean, that's probably going back 15 years, maybe more. And Vitaly Klitschko threw out a rotator cuff. I don't know I can't remember if it was his lead, his left shoulder, or it was right. I want to say it was the left shoulder, and it was that lead left hand, so it'd be hard to keep Bird off of him. But he was winning that fight, controlling it. I think he only had a few rounds left, and he retired in the corner because he was injured. And man, he got pounded, eviscerated by the media. I remember, I think it was Larry Merchant on the HBO broadcast just reamed him. I think more recent times, Victor Ortiz broke his jaw and was spitting up not just blood, but chunks of flesh from, I think, the bone cutting part of his cheek inside his mouth in the corner. And then after the fight, back in the locker room, he was literally out of his mouth. You could see hunks of skin, and he quit. I can't remember who that was against off the top of my head. I want to say Jose Cito Lopez, but that was a few years ago. And fans were booing him. I mean, just booing the hell out of him. Look, in those instances, there's an injury there, or you're taking a sustained beating, or you feel like this injury, if you keep fighting with the injury, it could get worse to where it could become a career-ending injury. Maybe you threw out a rotator cuff, but if you fight more rounds with that rotator cuff, that injury expands, it gets so bad to where you can never fight again. I try not to judge a fighter quitting in that type of scenario. I think that we in boxing need to be a little more forgiving in those scenarios. Guys, it's not the 1950s and the days of guys fighting until they die. Look, we still have fighters dying in 2016. We've had fighters die in the ring or as a result of injuries they suffered in the ring this year. It's 2016. So if a guy feels he should retire for an injury, fine. But in this situation with Nicholas Walters, it was the end of the 7th round. He had, 4 rounds to go. He wasn't taking crazy punishment. He wasn't cut. There was no injury. He was just being embarrassed by Lomachenko. Now, personally, I think the writing was on the wall for a stoppage. I think that Lomachenko was probably going to knock him out in the 10th or 11th round, somewhere around there. He was going to get that knockout. It was starting to build. You could see it. And Walters wanted to prevent that. But I don't know, man. There's this fine line. There's this gray area because I think that venue there at the Cosmopolitan in Vegas where they were at, it was a small little theater. I think it seats like 1,500, maybe 1,800 people, something like that. I know it's not more than 2,000. But those people all bought tickets. And it was a sellout at that venue. And when people are paying tickets for a fight and you're being paid $300,000 and a cable network, a premium cable network is putting you on air coast to coast in tens of millions of homes, and it's in a high profile fight like that against a pound for pound star, man, I'm not saying you have to go out on your shield, but just saying no mas, saying this guy's too good, I can't win tonight, I just don't agree with that. Even if Walters would have went to his corner at the end of that 7th round and said, look, man, I'm going to go balls out in this 8th round. I'm going to try to get him out of there. If I can't get him out of there, I want you guys to throw in the towel. I want you guys, my corner, to bail me out here. I'm not saying I love that, all right? Hear me out. I'm not saying I love that. But from a fan perspective, from a ticket buyer's perspective, you're not seeing the fighter quit. You're seeing the fighter's corner save him. I think that would have been a better way for Nicholas Walters to save face. But for now, man, he's off American TV for a while. I don't see HBO, Showtime, any of them wanting to spend money putting this guy on TV after seeing that. So he's got to know that. He's got to know that now he's going to have to rebuild his image. And you look at this guy, in 2014, he knocked out a complete shell of Victor Archinian, and he knocked out a faded version of Nonito Donaire. You think of both of those fights, big, dominant, exciting wins for Walters, but he was so much bigger than those guys. You think of where Donaire did his best work, where Darchinian did his best work, way down the weight scale, right? At 126, Walters was a monster compared to those guys. But those two knockouts really, really kind of put him on the map, and he was set up to do big things in 2015, but he missed weight for his next fight, lost his title on the scales. When he lost that title, he lost a lot of his leverage, his bargaining chip, if you will. When he went up to 130 to fight against Jason Sosa late last year, I thought he clearly won that fight, and that fight being a draw, that was a horrible decision. But he didn't look spectacular in that fight. And in fact, Jason Sosa kind of worked himself back into that fight to make it somewhat competitive later on. Walters really didn't build up a lot of momentum and demand from fans to see him. But early this year, in 2016, Bob Arum offered him $500,000 to fight Lomachenko. And Lomachenko was getting $800,000. And Nicholas Walters felt that he was worth more and that it should have been a 50-50 split of the purse. This is a textbook example of a fighter completely overvaluing themselves and just getting a big head way too soon. And I've seen this time and time again. It's a situation where, look, I've said it a million times, boxing is the sport of the poor. And a lot of fighters come from nothing. And you start making $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 per fight. You've never seen that kind of money. And some of these guys start making a couple $100,000 and they just either completely lose focus and fade away and become fat and bloated and start missing weight and everything else, or they start getting a big head and they start saying, you know what? I knocked out Nonito Donaire, so you better up my pay. I'm just as valuable as Vasyl Lomachenko. No, you're not. I get it. Vasyl Lomachenko lost his second pro fight to Orlando Salido, but he came back and won a title almost right away. Came right back and fought Gary Russell Jr. Took that O, completely made him look ordinary, right? Took a title. So at the beginning of this year, basically, if you look at Lomachenko-Walters when they're negotiating, Walters didn't have a title. Lomachenko had won that title at 126, right, with that fight against Gary Russell. So Then he moved up to 130 pounds and eventually went on to fight Roman Martinez and win a title there. So multiple titles, multiple weight classes. Considering that vast amateur pedigree, the fan base he brings in with the Ukrainian following and everything else, for Nicholas Walters to think he was as valuable as Vasyl Lomachenko and demand more money back then is just a fighter being delusional, getting a big head way too soon, and screwing their career up. Now, Walters, who could have got $500,000 to fight Lomachenko 10 months ago, 8-9 months ago, got $300,000 last Saturday. Looked really, really bad after that layoff. And look, I don't think the layoff affected the outcome of this fight one iota. Let me put that on the record. I think Lomachenko would have dominated him anyway. But the layoff probably made it even more one-sided to a degree because Walters looked a little rusty in moments, a little just out of sorts. But then to be embarrassed like that and then quit like this, dude. Look at where Walters was at the end of 2014 and look at where he is just 2 years later. That is how you fuck yourself in your boxing career in 24 months. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Lomachenko. And I did a rant video on him yesterday as well, talking about some of the haters that are starting to pop up now. And it just reminds me of the Triple G haters that started bubbling up in like 2014, early 2015. You're starting to see that now with Lomachenko because he's starting to get some love. He's starting to get a lot of exposure. This guy is 7-1 with 5 knockouts as a pro. And he has fought Orlando Salido, Roman Martinez, Gary Russell Jr., Nicholas Walters. Those are half of his pro opponents. Can you think of a guy who 8 fights in fought that caliber of opposition and won titles in 2 weight classes? I can't think of one. Not in a long, long time. There are only a few names that come close to, accomplishing something like that. It's special. And a lot of people are mad and hating and all the damn haters are out here, blah, blah, blah. And one of the talking points, and I'm not going to go into all this because I detailed it in my video that I made yesterday, so check that out. I think a lot of people feel threatened by Lomachenko because he's doing special things, not in the stereotypical style of guys like Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez and Sergey Kovalev. These kinds of guys coming from other parts of the world, not America, and they usually are knocking people out. They're stalkers, they're brawlers. At least that's the stereotype. Lomachenko ain't that guy. He's a very, very special technical fighter. He fights more in a style, at least to the uneducated eye, a style closer to Floyd Mayweather or Andre Ward. I personally don't think he fights anything like Andre Ward, Bernard Hopkins, or Terrence Crawford, any of those guys. But look, Guillermo Rigondeaux, who had a chance to fight Lomachenko in 2015, and there was all these stipulations about the weight. First he wanted it at 124, then it could be at 126, but there had to be a rehydration clause, and then they were arguing about money and venue and blah, blah, blah. He found a way not to make the fight happen, basically. Now, Guillermo Rigondeaux, since Saturday night, cannot get Vasyl Lomachenko's name out of his mouth and has just gone nuts on Twitter. And he's made it racial. He said something to the effect of, I guess you have to be Caucasian to be special and to be called, pound for pounder. I can't remember the exact words. But then he named fighters like himself, Andre Ward, and Terrence Crawford, who I don't think Terrence Crawford fits into that box because Terrence Crawford's more exciting than all those guys. It has only been called boring once against Victor Postol earlier this year. But it's just typical. It's just a microcosm of society. I say it all the time. Boxing is a microcosm of society, more so than any other sport because it gets to this visceral, emotional place that more than any other sport. And this is just par for the course. When you look at that fight with Orlando Salido, who a lot of the Lomachenko haters are going to always point to because he lost a fight. He must suck. That was his second pro fight. Orlando Salido was a welterweight in that fight, made absolutely no attempt to make weight because he wanted to be bigger than Lomachenko. He was over 12 pounds bigger than Lomachenko. It was basically a lightweight versus a welterweight that night in the ring. Repeated fouls and low blows. And Lomachenko still almost won it. Almost won it. It was a split decision win, I believe, for Salido. I think one judge had it 7-5 for Lomachenko. That one loss in that second pro fight showed more and did more. There was more of a learning curve in that one loss than 20, 30 of these fights that so many prospects, particularly from the Al Heyman world, learn in their 20, 30 fights against stiffs. You look at the learning curve of Gary Russell Jr., who had tons of fights against nobodies, and that one fight Lomachenko had against Salido. When those two fought, who looked like the more battle-tested, grizzled, veteran pro fighter? And here's the thing, Lomachenko's only getting better. So expect more of that hate to continue. It's just going to bubble up more and more and more. All the Triple G haters are going to jump onto the Lomachenko train now. And but at the same time, expect Lomachenko to continue to do great things. They're talking about Manny Pacquiao and Terrence Crawford. I think all that is way, way, way too soon. He needs to clean up things at 130 pounds, and that starts with a rematch with Orlando Salido. I think next spring in LA at StubHub Center with maybe Vargas Miura 2. It could be the battle of the rematches as a co-feature. That would be an awesome card here in LA on HBO. A couple interesting fights this week. We'll start with one that really doesn't matter. Billy Joe Saunders in Scotland taking on Arthur Akrov, defending his WBO middleweight title. This will be his first fight since last December 19th. So almost one full calendar year since Billy Joe Saunders has been in the ring. And even this fight against the Russian Arthur Akrov was delayed. I think multiple times. The guy's he's a complete non-factor. I don't care about this fight. I don't give a damn. Part of me wants to see the Russian pull it off, but we know that ain't gonna happen. Speaking of Russians, there is a great cruiserweight fight going down in Moscow Saturday. Denis Lebedev going up against Murat Gassiev. Lebedev is 29-2, 22 knockouts. Currently holds the WBA and IBF cruiserweight titles. He unified the titles back in May. He's held the WBA title for a couple years. He won the IBF title back in May. Gassiev is 23-0, 17 knockouts. Trains up in Big Bear, part of that camp with Gennady Golovkin. And trainer Abel Sanchez calls him my cruiserweight Golovkin. That's what he says, right? I thought Gassiev scored the knockout of the year earlier this year. I think it was on a PBC card. Just blasted a guy out of there. Really game-changing power for Gassiev. Just a naturally strong, big guy. But Lebedev is the veteran, battle-tested. He has been stopped once, but generally speaking, has showed a good, sturdy chin and probably has, well, definitely has more experience, but probably has a little more craft and fluidity about him than Gassiev, at least more than Gassiev has shown. All that being said, I favor the undefeated prospect. I think youth will be served. I think Lebedev has been in there a few times with in some hard, long, wars, some tough fights. I expect to see Lebedev up early in this fight, maybe winning going into the middle late rounds, and then Gassiev starts to put on a charge. It knocks him out late, scores a TKO to grab these titles. And I think that would be an awesome scenario, because then you would have Gassiev, undefeated young guy with 2 of the titles, and Alexander Usyk, undefeated young guy with 1 of the titles. And maybe we can start talking about those two unifying this thing next year to create a new lineage, a new championship at cruiserweight. And speaking of Usyk, I'm actually meeting with him and his team tomorrow. K2 Promotions is having a little media luncheon here in LA, invite only, and they hit us up. So me and Tiffany are going to go see Alexander Usyk. We'll try to grab an interview and talk to Tom Loeffler and those guys about what's going on with Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and some of the other things. So we should have some interviews from all that posted for you guys. But interesting co-feature on this card. Edward Troyanovsky, undefeated, 25-0, 22 knockouts. He holds the IBF junior welterweight title. He beat the Argentinian fighter earlier this year, Cesar Rene Cuenca. Well, actually, it was November of last year. They fought the first time when Cuenca was 48-0. He was almost TBE. But then Troyanovsky beat him, and I think they fought again. He beat him again. So anyway, undefeated, holds the title at 140. He's going up against an undefeated fighter from Namibia, Africa, Julius Indongo, who's 20-0 against a bunch of stiffs. This dude has a padded record against a bunch of nobodies. I have no idea why he's sanctioned in this fight, but that's the IBF. I don't know if he's a mandatory or what, but man, this is a pretty meaningless fight. This is a showcase for Troyanovsky. I only mention it because he does look interesting, and it's probably worth a look if you find a stream of this card. You should check that kid out. But for Indongo, he's never fought outside of Namibia, I believe. So, it's got to be a scary situation for him. That one could get ugly. Could see a concussive, crazy-ass knockout. I think that's probably what we'll see in that fight. But that's all that's going on this week, guys. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I want to say thank you. We hit 3,000 subs on my channel over the weekend. That was one of my goals for this year. And, I set several goals for myself and for Tiffany to accomplish this year in boxing, and we met all of our goals. So thank you so much for all your support, man. And it's just on to bigger and better things as we go into 2017. So thank you very, very much. And I'll see you at the fights.